Brandon, I'll go to you first on this one. Where does this year's Daytona 500 stack up with past years, especially from 2020 to now?
I can't believe 2020 is the 5 year ago mark, but here we are. And you look back at the 2020 Daytona 500 or whatever we can remember of that, and the 2021 500, the last 2 years of the Gen 6 era, they seem to be ridden, from my memory, with a lot more yellows at the end and going into overtime and just dealing with the carnage fest. And just the year before that, that was the Austin Dillon turning Eric Almirola on the backstretch on the final lap. But fast forward into the Gen 7 era, the next gen era of the 500, I think for the most part, we've seen, certainly a different kind of 500-miler race, and they haven't always been 500 miles. That's another big point. So I think the main thing is it's, I think, been more gentlemanly, a little more friendly throughout the race, as opposed to the Gen 6, where we would have different yellows for carnage, not only in the last stage of the race, but also stage 1 and stage 2. It seemed to be littered about. But from what I can remember, the last couple of years, it seems we've had some really competitive, clean racing with the next gen car until we get to, of course, the big one, that the inevitable last 10 laps, last 20 laps carnage we're always expecting into the entrance of turn 3 is just a given at this point.
Overall, I would have to agree on a lot of points, especially I felt the racing in general was a little bit cleaner. A lot of times I anticipate, okay, we're going to have caution after caution after caution. We're going to go to overtime. But this year, we saw a relatively clean race compared to past Daytona 500, especially when you look at Talladega, another super speedway. And one of the big things I was surprised was the racing product. I felt like this was one of the better ones with this car. We talked about on Sunday morning about the possibility that high line was going to be the dominant line. It sure was a powerful line, but what the drivers have now done, they rather than staying the bottom line, they're now going up to the high line side draft and making the racing a lot more visually entertaining rather than just having that top line just freight train and pull away. I was really impressed with the way the stages sort of worked out with the pit stop strategy, seeing the manufacturers trying to see where to pit. And then, of course, you had drivers like Joey Logano. He just seemed to be perfect where he could pull into pit road under green, come out, and then work his way towards the front where you had other drivers. They tried to work their maneuvers in pit road. Didn't seem to work out. So overall, I thought it was a really entertaining race. The big one, you anticipate that's going to happen everywhere. I know we had a small 5-car pileup early on. Just looked like it was one of those deals, but I think this was just pretty much one of the better Daytona 500s, at least I would say in the last 5 years, because it seemed like we've known for it being riddled with wrecks here and there. As you mentioned, Austin Dillon's move to get the win is still not a move I really like or a way to win. But when you put the biggest race in the year, a big purse over $28 million, what do you expect? But overall, good, clean race, and for what a lot of people anticipate, especially the way the weekend started with the trucks and ARCA, I think definitely a better one.
That's a great point. The choo-choo train is gone. And also, I think, Ben, is this the first time in a while that the purse has been mentioned? That feels like a thing that's been really lacking in the last 20 years.
I think Bob Pockers puts the purse out every week, or tries to, for a lot of the races, but he'll send a quick tweet out, and his followers will see it, but it doesn't get mentioned on the broadcast. You don't see it in the official race results like you used to. I mean, you used to know exactly how much down to the exact dollar 27th place made. Those days are long gone with the charter system. I think finally put an end to that. But like Joe mentioned, I saw the post about the purse this week. It seemed like they were really pushing that. I think it might have set a record even with how much money was on the line here. Joe, Brandon, I got to tell you guys, it was a very weird feeling last night because, and I saw this going off in a couple of group chats that I'm in. It was the same reaction. People were frustrated about the finish and said, all we do is tear up cars nowadays. And it's not like, how these guys raced 20 years ago and we can never get a clean finish of a race. And it seemed like people were just as frustrated as they've been the last several years. But for me, I'm sorry, I simply can't go along with that after this year's Daytona 500. I know people like to see me, go off and get on my soapbox and everything, and I'm kind of known for being someone who's not afraid to speak his mind here and say, like, this is just how I feel, and I'm going to give you my raw and honest opinion, and I don't like what we're continuing to see in the direction that this sport is going. And don't get me wrong, I don't think the finish was necessarily good. It's not great that we saw a wreck there at the end and we got to finish under caution once again. But at the bare minimum, it ended at mile 500, and the wreck at the end was not that bad. I mean, you compare it to the wreck that we had at the end of a 2021 race with that fireball and a similar situation. Did McDowell actually win the race? Who was ahead at the moment of caution? You compare that to 2020. Obviously, we were all on our hands and knees praying for Ryan Newman that night and his safety and everything. Really a scary situation for a couple of hours, genuinely not knowing if he was going to be okay. It was a very scary situation then. Joe, you brought up Austin Dillon's move, spinning and wrecking Eric Almirola and showing little to no remorse in his post-race interview, literally saying, I did what I had to do there at the end. Look, I hate it for the 10 guys, but this is the Daytona 500. I mean, Ross Chastain, I know, had an opportunity, took the move. Corey LaJoie and Austin Cindric are mad at each other. I understand that it wasn't the clean finish that we all want to see. We're still waiting for that. But I think 3 for sure, maybe 4 of the last 6 Daytona 500s, because last year, what did it end up being with Daytona 530? I think we set a new record with all the wrecks we were seeing, right?
Yeah, the longest.
I think in the stage racing era, you can make an argument this was the second least bad, if you want to use that term and not go all the way and say better, because you still have problems with it. But the second least bad race that we saw in terms of from start to finish, everything playing out. I had another friend who mentioned that he wasn't a fan of the fact that the fuel strategy came in so much to the point where AJ Allmendinger was running laps by himself faster than the pack. And I get that. I don't think that's necessarily the greatest look either, but I will take that. I'll take the strategy that comes with that, and I will take the relatively clean racing. I think if you look at from lap 6 when we had the first wreck, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, to lap whatever it was, 191, 192, when we got the biggest wreck of the night, if that had been the entire race, it probably would have been universally praised as the best Daytona 500 in years. So I think the ingredients are there. We can get back to that point. But if we're going to continue to make the argument that these are the 40 best stock car drivers in the world, just for once, can we have a finish like we had in 2017 where it actually even came down to fuel strategy? That's how long the last green flag run was. And we ended up seeing the lead traded several times with Chase Elliott getting up there and then getting passed by Kyle Larson, and then Larson running out on the last lap and Kurt Busch coming through for the win. That was a fantastic 500 finish for my money. And I wish that at some point we could get back to that, not just in the Daytona 500, but at the Talladega races and the summer Daytona race, because it seems like every time it's certainly not as bad as the truck and ARCA races we'll talk about here later in the show. But it is still incredibly frustrating to have, again, like I tweeted last night, a great Daytona 475 or Daytona 480, and then have it all go to crap there at the very end like it has for the last several years. But bare minimum, it ended at mile number 500 this year. And for that, I am certainly happy.
I think the Cup Series culture, as far as if they can drive the same way they did last night, I think it's in a really good place compared to where it's been in several years past. I think that's a credit to the car. I think that's a credit to a lot of the champions in the field and how many years have been put on a lot of these drivers. And the rookies are kind of far few and in between at the moment. And some of them were out there early in the going. I think they've learned some respect. Now it's these other lower series. We're going to talk about them here real soon, but they're the ones that need the help. But the Cup Series, it's surprisingly looking really good. You got to give them all the credit there. Can't complain, but still you can't stop cars this close together going that fast for 200 laps and expect it to be perfect for 500 miles. It's just not going to happen. At least, with paychecks on the line, it's not happening.
And the one thing, when you look at the Daytona 500 or any of the super speedways, even in the 90s when the restrictor plates got introduced, we still had at least one big one. I felt the big ones that we saw, it was just a product of, a bad push, not something deliberate like we've seen in the past. And overall, the drivers, they seem to race pretty smart throughout the night. And one of the big things, I think, as you mentioned, considering that we've lost, Jimmy Johnson, he retired full time, Kevin Hart retired full time. I think there was some drivers concerned, like what is going to be the respect level? What's going to be the culture in the garage? It's going to be the voice of the garage for the drivers going forward. And the idea that we're going to have these more drivers coming up from the lower levels that we're just going to, I just did everything I could to win, whether it's pushing somebody to wreck them or other things where we're going to be, not happy with the product. Overall, we saw a pretty good race. And I think overall good product out there on the track. Was it great? No, I wouldn't say great, but I think it was something that NASCAR probably feel pleased about. Despite it ending under caution, they would have loved to see it go all the way to the end under green conditions, but that was just not the case. So overall, I feel NASCAR has to feel pretty pleased with where they are right now with this package. The drivers, they seem to drive pretty smart. I didn't see any drivers. I mean, we know Keselowski is going to be aggressive pushing. Stenhouse is also one of those drivers that's very aggressive, but he ran a pretty quiet race as well too. Ross Chastain, now that I think he has the confidence to go out there and win, I think he's going to be aggressive, not just in the super speedways, but everywhere. But overall, I don't see any drivers that, to me, were racing with a discard to everyone's respect level out there and just trying to take advantage of putting people in dangerous spots.